welcome to my latest episode of Proudly Jewish, Conversations on Israel and Jewish Identity. And I've been looking at various elements of the repercussions, the aftermath of October 7th. But today I wanted to explore another element of anti-Semitism, potential anti-Semitism, that is not directly related to October 7th, the Black Hebrew Israelites.
First of all, I am Jew also. The 12 lost tribes of Hebrew. Do the math. Do your research on it.
I'm joined today by a very special guest, Charles Fain Lehman. Charles is a fellow at the Manhattan Institute and a contributing editor of City Journal and a 2023-2024 Robert Novak Fellow with the Fund for American Studies. A lot more as well, but I'm not going to go into his whole bio completely. Charles, thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. Happy to be on.
Tell me, who are the Black Hebrew Israelites? What do they believe?
You know, that's a thornier question than it would seem, because when people think about Black Hebrew Israelism, they think, if they think about it at all, they probably think about sort of the most high visibility instances of it. In DC, near where I live, you sort of sometimes see these guys street preaching, they'll dress in sort of outlandish garb, yell a controversial thing about how God is going to kill all white people, that sort of thing. You know, I think that though is often perceived as sort of the most extreme wing. There's really a diversity of Black Hebrew Israelite thought based on what research has been done on them. It's hard almost to say that there's a single Black Hebrew Israelite ideology. What I'd say is that Black Hebrew Israelism is really just a single belief, of which there are many, or there's some number of devotees with other divergent beliefs. But that single belief is that Black Americans, African Americans, are descendants directly of the 12 tribes of Israel. Sometimes, although not always, this also means believing that Jews are not descended from the 12 tribes of Israel, that Black people are the true descendants, or alternately that a variety of people, including Black people, the true descendants, including or not including Jews. But most fundamentally, if you want a single sentence summary, Black Hebrewism is the idea that Black people are descended from the 12 tribes, and particularly African Americans are descended from the 12 tribes. And here I should note, this is not an original idea. The concept of Hebrew Israelism predates Black Hebrew Israelism. There's a Hebrew Israelist movement in the UK, for example, which makes the argument that the English are descended from the 12 tribes. With lost tribes, mythology exists. Many people have that story or incorporate that story in some way, shape, or form. But there's a particular manifestation in the American context, in the Black American context.
Right, and there's also a bit of that in the Caribbean, right, with like Bob Marley, and I mean, I'm not an expert, so I'm not expressing this very well, but there's an element of seeing themselves as being part of the Judah, part of and while I do want to explore this, it's more about for me and my audience, the impact on Jews. Is this a threat? Is this not a threat? It's nice theoretically that someone else sees themselves as sharing the same roots. We do that. I do that. In my life, individually, we try to find connections. Oh, are you from here? Oh, I'm from here. Here's my connection to you. Shared ancestries, shared pasts, etc. And I think you alluded to this before, that just in your little intro, that this can be, I'm paraphrasing, but the idea is that this can be benign and not. And so where I fear jumping right to the end here, but please explore this just a little bit more. Like why, we've discovered, there are Ethiopians, right? Several decades ago, I mean, well, more than that, but I think in the average Jewish conscience, average Jewish mind, we discovered, oh, there's these other people that have had a Jewish heritage in other parts of the world, and particularly right now I'm talking about the Ethiopians, and they are, Black Israelites. They branched off, and there's a shared history, interrupted, and then a common direction. How is this different?
Right. Well, and you see these, you see groups who engage in what seem like remarkably Jewish practices, such that in some cases the state of Israel says, yes, these people are Jews. In diverse places, there are Black Jews in Ethiopia, the Beta Israel. There are Black Jews in Nigeria,
Right.
who are I think that's mostly uncontroversial that they're considered Jews. There are Jews in India. There are Jews, people who look remarkably like Jews in Myanmar, and I'm not ultimately an adequate authority to judge which groups are or are not legitimately Jewish. Um, and on the other hand, as you alluded to, there are Black groups. There are unambiguously Black Jews, Black people who everyone would agree is Jewish, or
Right.
all reasonable Jewish authorities would agree are Jewish. There are predominantly Black Abrahamic religions which claim some connection to that larger tradition. Here, you were talking earlier about Rastafarianism,
Right.
where the contention is that the emperor of Ethiopia was Haile Selassie was the Return of the Messiah. Uh, Black Hebrew Israelism, I think, is different, mm, insofar as, in general, there are very few people who incredibly agree with the claim that Black Americans are descended from the 12 tribes of Israel, right? Even if you take a fairly secular perspective, most people agree. My genes go back to a group of people who were in and around the area of the modern day state of Israel thousands of years ago. That is probably not true of most Black people in the United States. To get back to your question about sort of danger versus not, what I like to say is, look, there are, and we talk about my survey, a fair number of Black people who appear to believe this. If they just believe that and bear me no ill will, I think that's kind of kooky. But we live in America; it's a land of kooky beliefs, and it doesn't really affect me if people just have kooky beliefs. The difference is that there are instances of Black Hebrew Israelism being associated with violence and anti-Semitism, or violent anti-Semitism. People who identify as Black Hebrew Israelites engaging in violence towards others, engaging in violence towards Jews, engaging in fairly public displays of anti-Semitism, condemning Jews as the children of Satan, saying that Jews are pretenders, liars, etc. That sort of rhetoric can be associated with violence. And so, when we go back to the sort of visible Black Hebrew Israelism, that kind of extremism is sort of where this starts being a kooky belief and starts being, okay, there are ways potentially in which this belief can overlap with harmful behaviors, risky behaviors, behaviors that put the Jewish community at risk. That's part of my research interest in it.
I wanted to look at a video for a moment, and that I found a bit menacing. And maybe I was wrong to find that, but I know that many people in the Jewish community found this to be menacing. Was it last year or two? I think it was 2 years ago in 2022. Basketball player Kyrie Irving from the Brooklyn Nets promoted a book that I think had expressed some of this idea, and lots of Jews mentioned this, felt this was very anti-Semitic of him to be promoting or publicizing perhaps this book. And there were calls on him to apologize because it was anti-Semitic. He dug in his heels saying, this is not anti-Semitic. I am not an anti-Semite. And there were some demonstrations in his favor. So I want you to take a look at this and just let me know what you think.
On forever. They basically surrounded the Barclay Center. There wasn't some hundreds, there were thousands out there. And you know what? I'm proud of them. Because this is what happens when the media fails to do its job. When the media strings up Kyrie Irving at the behest of the puppet masters.
When I saw this on social media back in real time, back when this was happening, I felt threatened. Yeah, I'm not in New York, but as a Jew, I felt that we were being threatened. Here's a large group, he says in the thousands, this fellow, saying, hey, Jacob, it's time to wake up. We are the real Jews. And I don't know what else they were saying in the chant, but it's a show of, I don't want to say force, but it's a big show of numbers, and it's forceful. And am I right to feel, just to see that as menacing, and that is not, that the message there is not, hey, we share a background. Is there a sense of replacement?
Yeah, I mean, look, so to talk a little bit about the Kyrie Irving incident. Irving, as you mentioned, he's a basketball player. He shared on Twitter a documentary, Hebrews to Negroes, Wake Up, Black America. It claimed that Jews were responsible for the slave trade, that Jews are in league with Satan. Obviously, people weren't happy about that. But so when he returned to his first game back, there was a huge rally at the Barclay Center. And the folks in the video are chanting, "We're the real Jews." They distributed flyers about the truth about anti-Semitism and the truth about slavery. So yeah, this gets into that sort of more extremist Black Hebrew Israelism. And I think it is worthwhile to draw that distinction, because you can get lots of people sort of naively agree like that. You can get white people, by the way, to agree in a survey to the claim Black people are descended from the 12 tribes. But it is, I think that there is a not necessary but natural association between that belief and other conspiratorial beliefs which tend to sort of exist in a nexus around anti-Semitism, right? So there's this theory: not only are Black people descended from Jews, from the 12 tribes, but also Jews are not. We are pretenders. We are the children of Satan, or we are the sort of most scientific, quote unquote, version is that we are descended from the converts in Eastern Europe and Khazaria. It's a separate issue. It doesn't really hold up to genetic inspection. But the point is that Black Hebrew Israelism in this context is not only is there some connection between Black people and the 12 tribes, but that there's that Jews are hiding this truth, that we are pretenders to the true inheritors of the Mosaic tradition, and that we are that we're threatened, that we are puppet masters, that we this is all very standard like anti-Semitic stuff. This is just like textbook anti-Semitism, and I think it is significant that the idea that the sort of kooky idea that I alluded to, Black Hebrew Israelism, often does go hand in hand with these other conspiratorial beliefs that together absolutely can induce people to engage in harmful, violent behavior.
So you mentioned the Khazars, and I know that's a different story, but I think it overlaps it's poignant right now, because one of the arguments that I've heard a lot regarding, from the Palestinian or pro-Palestinian side of pro-Palestinian camp that wants to invalidate Jewish claims to the land of Israel is, listen, you are not, you'll hear Palestinians and their supporters say, you are not indigenous to this land, you are descendants of the Khazars. And I've heard this as well from a Palestinian that I know as well, we are the real Jews, they'll say about themselves. We are genetically descendants of these people. So the idea that that this other group, whatever this other group is, are the true descendants of ancient Israel is not new. And the idea in the church, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, perhaps even more, the idea that there's, about basically 2,000 years ago, here's the new chosen people, here's the new Israel, the New Testament. And it's not that they were genetically inheritors of descendants of the Hebrews, but rather spiritual ones. And there was that claim, and it led to violence. It led to that kind of thinking, saying that we have this new religion, these Christians, we are we are the correct path, and you no longer are following the right way. Leads to anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish hatred. And right now, what we're seeing with Palestinians, there's a lot of that type of thinking as well, saying you are not real. And the implication it's not just an idea, there's an implication. And therefore, you do not belong on this land. Therefore, you're story, your narrative is wrong, and then it can lead to violence. Is there? So when I hear what you're saying, I don't want to say I don't care, but I worry about the extremists, the people who are not extreme, wonderful, but the extremists who harbor these feelings, how dangerous, how actionable is that extremist threat?
Right. Well, so I've alluded a little bit. Part of what I've done on Black Hebrew Israelism is through the Manhattan Institute where I work, we did a survey because there's remarkably little quantitative research on Black Hebrew Israelites, and so we fielded a survey of Black and non-Black Americans, and we asked them a bunch of questions, and the goal was to identify what is the connection between this belief, asserting that Black people are descended from 12 tribes of Israel, and your support for anti-Semitism and your support for violence and political extremism.
Right.
And what I find, though, just to give you the top line summary, but I think is relevant to your question, is in general, so I estimate that something like a quarter of the Black population professes this belief, and something like 10% profess this belief and also would call themselves a Black Hebrew Israelite. And then the second thing is that, when looking at the connection between that belief, professing the belief that Black people are descended from the 12 tribes is significantly, in a statistical sense, associated with willingness to agree with a battery of anti-Semitic beliefs, that Jews are more loyal to Israel, that Jews have too much power, that Jews are involved in the slave trade. It's also interestingly associated. We asked two sets of questions. One is a battery about interpersonal violence, like, are there situations when you think it's okay to punch another guy? And the other one is about political violence. What are reasons that you would think it would be reasonable to like go fight for when can you use violence to achieve an important political objective, to oppose a government that doesn't share your beliefs, to prevent discrimination? Black Hebrew Israelism, believing that, is associated with support for that kind of political violence, but not interpersonal violence. So the theme I've been trying to harp on when I talk about when I talk about it is possible to have sort of a benign Black Hebrew Israelite, I say that because you want to be deliberate about identifying who is and is not at risk. It's never good to say this is America, people get to have kooky beliefs. On the other hand, clearly this belief is and can be associated within a subset of these believers, can be associated with conspiratorial views about the Jews, support for political change through violent means. What I end up arguing using these data, and there's more research to be done, what I argue using these data is Black Hebrew Israelism is plausibly part of a nexus of conspiratorial thinking specific to America's Black population. And, that's not unique to Black Americans. White Americans believe all sorts of conspiracy theories. Americans believe all sorts of conspiracy theories. But within the context of Black America, when going back to the about Kyrie Irving, the idea that Jews ran the slave trade, the idea that Jews are, that Jews are hiding the truth, that takes specific form in a Black context that often looks like Black Hebrew Israelism, associated Black Hebrew Israelism. And yes, all else equal, that is predictive of being willing to, or at least be willing to say you are willing to use violence. It is as reasonable to be concerned, and part of my agenda in doing this research is to say it is as reasonable to be concerned about this kind of extremism as it is reasonable to be concerned about any kind of extremism. That the conversation on extremist violence in the United States is very much dominated by particular concerns. I think predominantly are right-wing white supremacy. I think those concerns are not unmerited. Some ways they're overstated, but I think right-wing white supremacy is bad. But I think that we underrate things that fall outside of that domain when we talk about dangerous violent extremism, racially motivated extremism. Black Hebrew Israelism, and specifically in its extreme manifestations, is a good example of, is a very obvious and under-researched instance of that extremist tendency that can pose a threat.
And is it taken seriously, would you say? Is it recognized by, I guess, two parties? Is it recognized by the Jewish community at large, as far as you know, and by authorities, and law enforcement authorities, I mean?
I think it is. I think it is always in the back of a lot of the Jewish community's mind. Well, no, I'm not even sure that's true. I think in places where it's salient,
Yes.
it can be relevant to Jews. That if you live in Brooklyn, if you live in Crown Heights, you've dealt with Black Hebrew Israelism. If you live here in DC, you've interacted with Black Hebrew Israelites. If you are visibly Jewish, they have probably harassed you, and so that is very salient to you. For people who don't live in those communities, who are not, who choose not to be visibly Jewish, that may be less relevant. And my, as my attitude generally is that I like as somebody who doesn't wear a head covering, doesn't wear kippah on a daily basis, like people like me are not adequately aware of the way in which people who choose to be visibly Jewish are put in peril, put at risk. We should be more deliberate about that. And I think that people like me uh, often don't understand the way in which that is an issue. But if you're likely to be victimized, you're probably more aware of it.
Yeah.
Are police aware of this as an issue? I think it varies by community. I don't have a great sense. I think that there is, as this has become salient, you're talking Kyrie Irving, you're talking Kanye West, you're talking this protest at the Barclay Center. Clearly, there was sort of momentary awareness. Do I think that the organizations that focus on this prioritize it? No, not really. The nonprofits that focus on this, groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center, have systematically de-emphasized focus on this kind of thing bluntly because in the wake of the summer of 2020, they rush to expunge any implication that Black people can do anything wrong. And again, this is why I try to emphasize that this is a subset of extremists. It's not all Black people believe this about themselves, or all Black people believe this about Jews. But by the same token, when Black people do believe this about Jews in this nexus of conspiratorial beliefs, we ought to take it exactly as seriously as we take other kinds of dangerous conspiratorial beliefs.
No, I agree with you, and it's of course it's obvious. It should be obvious that this is not a question of hey, everyone from this community and everyone. No, but the idea that it seemed stories about this seem to be expunged because of who the perpetrators are, it's not right either. And I want to say, oh, go ahead.
I would say, if I can add one thought to that, part of what motivated this survey, I was having a conversation with a friend who does a lot of work in sort of the Jewish community generally, policy related to it. And the reason that he raised it to me actually is that he does a lot of work associated with Jewish Christian outreach, trying to connect those communities. And he has spoken to a lot of Black Christian preachers who are concerned about the influence of this movement in their congregations, that they have young Black men, young Black women who are being influenced by Black Hebrew Israelite influencers online. And what is the scale of that? What is the extent of that? They didn't really know, but they are alarmed about the influence of this movement in their communities as well.
So I want to show a commercial where they promote themselves, and it connects to what you just said. But before that, I want to close a thought that I had before, which is I recall one of the big reasons why Barry Weiss resigned from the New York Times is she had written. I remember her saying that she had written. She thought it was an in-depth piece that was very salient at the time about it was Hanukkah. I don't remember the exact year. I think 2020. Perhaps I'm wrong. It might be the next year. Where there was an attack on Jews every single day of that holiday in different regions, and by Black people. And by no means was she saying anything about Black people on the whole. She was talking about specific incidents, and particularly and again, it wasn't on all Jews. It was on particularly Hasidic Jews. And she resigned again for multiple reasons, but one of them was this one where the story was not printed, and it was the wrong political climate for that. And it's worrisome when, as Jews, you want to be protected, and if because of another narrative, the threat is buried because it's not convenient for in other ways, it's worrisome. Now, I'll show you this commercial because I think it connects to what you were saying about a moment ago.
Shalom, I'm Yahshua Israel of Israel United in Christ here in Phoenix, Arizona. We are a nonviolent, Bible-based organization that is committed to the healing and reconnecting of the Black, Hispanic, and Native American communities. Here at Israel United in Christ, you will discover with proof and historical facts that we are indeed the chosen people of the Bible. Instead of hating one another and continuing the division amongst us, we must work together against the forces of oppression that have put us in prison houses, placed drugs in our communities, and left us with single-parent homes and hopelessness.
The fellow speaking is expanding the scope of its membership to, say, Latinos as well. And it's saying we have this heritage. But when I watch this, there's an element of empowerment, saying it seems to be trying to say, look, we're not nothings. We have a heritage in this glorious and noble and moral, group that emanates from the Bible that we consider holy. Is it benign there? What you're seeing in that? I know I keep coming back to that.
No,
I keep coming back to it.
It's an interesting paradox, right? Because you think about to break away from Black Hebrew Israelism, and so you're talking. It's expanding. Hebrew Israelism often includes other quote unquote marginalized people. They'll say, the 12 tribes, some of them were in Africa and some of them were in Latin America and some of them were Native Americans. And it's all, once you're in for a penny, in for a pound, right? No, so it's interesting. You think about a group like the Nation of Islam, which is a virulently anti-Semitic, often quite violent organization that also agitates, that also advocates for Black community uplift in a way that is sometimes quite healthy and beneficial, helping young Black men stay out of gangs, get jobs, keep families together. I'm unwilling to say that one is tainted or redeemed by the other. And I obviously can't judge what this group is doing. I don't know a huge amount about them. Is it ultimately necessarily benign? No. Ultimately, I don't love that they are making sort of an odd claim, but this goes back to the conversation about you're talking about Barry Weiss's piece, and I think I write a lot about. Part of my interest in this is I work on hate crime, and I think about hate crime, and I'm a right-leaning guy, and a lot of people on the right are not sympathetic to hate crime and managing hate crime. Part of what I say is, as a person on the right, I believe in a certain kind of tolerance. I care about free speech. I care about freedom of religion. I care that people with wildly different beliefs, part of why America has been great for the Jewish people is because this is a place where we are protected in our religious beliefs, where we're allowed to do things that other people find strange, unusual, alienating. That's our right. And hate crime enforcement, managing and dealing with extremism is partially about, saying you are allowed to think bad things about my group. You are not allowed to act on it. You cannot target me on the basis of my religion. You cannot target me on the basis of my membership in this group. And so, my attitude about a group like that is, it is entirely possible that they are good. It is entirely possible that they are bad. It's entirely possible that they're bad and doing good things. It's entirely possible that they're good and doing bad things. By default, it is good, in my view, that the tolerance that protects you and I also protects them. If they happen to be organizing to, go after Jews and beat them on the street, then we've got an issue. Then I start to be very concerned. There's some risk there. But on the other hand, America's a land of kooky beliefs, and I think that's good on net.
It's a very hostile time right now for Jewish students, for example. And I see what we're talking about here today, and I worry, in a climate of extremism, is this going to blossom? Is this blossom in a bad way? Is it going to grow, or is it going to temper? And either give us a crystal ball prediction about where this is going, and as either that, or what would you like to leave us with as a message?
Yeah, I am as concerned as anybody about the potential for liberal anti-Semitism from the left, from the right. I think it's a real issue. It's a real problem. You see it. You obviously see it on college campuses. You see it on the internet. The ground state in history is anti-Semitism, right? Like wherever we've been, people have hated the Jews, and we were remarkably lucky to live in a country where that is the exception rather than the norm. I think that it is, I think about this on two different levels. There's sort of the the level of speech and the level of acts. On the level of speech, handling how people engage with each other on campus, for example, I remain ultimately sort of a maybe a naive liberal in this regard. I tend to think that more speech is better on campus, all else being equal. People will disagree, and that's a longer conversation. But when I think about acts, and this goes back to the thing about hate crimes, it is valuable to clearly delineate those things so that when speech turns into act, when hate becomes hate crime, we are clear about the capacity of the criminal justice system to address that. Here is where I think it is my caution to Jewish listeners is do not be squeamish about responding to crime per se with the traditional tools of the criminal justice system. I've written about my research on hate crime, arguing that hate crime offenders are not what I call specialists, that people who commit hate crimes commit other crimes. And that suggests that their behavior is as much about a tendency towards crime as is about a tendency towards hate. And that therefore the best tool for addressing hate crime is ultimately deterring and incapacitating them through the traditional tools of the criminal justice system. And so, I don't have good answers for how to deal with burgeoning campus anti-Semitism. I can tell you that it's important to draw a bright line on what sort of behavior what sort of actions are intolerable, and not to be afraid of enforcing when people cross that line, not to sort of hem and haw about the implications or the equity implications for doing that. Those are powerful tools that, in my view, ultimately preserve a liberal, tolerant society.
I'm going to place a link in the YouTube of to your survey, to the article, and I think that I forget the name, the title, but I'll put a link there for our viewers to read more. I encourage you to read more, to know more. It is not covered enough, and I'm very appreciative, Charles, for your time to share, to talk about the Black Hebrew Israelites, and it's something that we're, as you mentioned in your articles as well, that we don't know enough about it. And
Yep.
we got to keep our eye on it. Charles, thank you so much for being my guest today on Proudly Jewish. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.